this computer. All right, it says it's recording. I'm not sure where this recording is going to end up, but it says recording, so I believe we're good to go.
All right. Well, hey guys, I'm Jake Gearman. I'm a finance major here at OSU, and I am from Lorain County, which is near Cleveland, Ohio, up north and here in Ohio. And the reason I chose to take this class this spring was I grew up in a diverse friend group up in Cleveland in childhood. This diverse friend group would range from ethnicities such as Vietnamese, Cambodians, Chinese, and ranging from individuals from Russia and Somalian as well. And the reason for that pertains to taking the course was to learn more about how systemic racism affects those children specifically from the concepts we've learned thus far.
And I'm Enzo Borghese. I was born and raised here in Columbus, Ohio, but my parents are both from Argentina and they immigrated here. So I definitely saw a lot of that. I grew up in a community that was almost exclusively white, Caucasian. So a bit of a different experience than you, but yeah.
Hi guys, I'm Scott Allen. I'm an architecture major and I'm in my 4th year here at OSU. I've grown up really all over Ohio, from inner city Columbus to southeastern Ohio, up to northwest Ohio, around like the Dublin area. And I have a background with, I'm also mixed. My father's American and my mother is Filipino. So I have a very interesting situation with what we'll be talking about today. So today we're going to be discussing the development of systemic racism in children and how this issue can affect them growing up into adulthood. To understand this issue more, we're first going to evaluate the concept of the one and the other and how this impacts individuals throughout their life. Then we'll dive into questions pertaining to racism, from how it occurs and how it is formed. So Enzo, if you want to define the one and the other to get us started, that'd be great.
Sure, I can do that. And so othering is a phenomenon in which some individuals or groups are kind of defined and labeled as not fitting in with the norms of like the main predominant social group. So it's an effect that influences how people perceive and treat those who are viewed as being part of the in-group versus those who are seen as being part of the out-group. And Jacob, if you want to go ahead and define racism for us.
Sure, let's get to it. So the definition that we thought that best suits our topic of today deals with the belief that groups of humans possesses different behavioral traits corresponding to physical appearance and can be divided based on the superiority of one race over another. It may also mean prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against other people because they are of a different ethnicity. So again, we go into more questions. Scott, do you want to discuss how these occurrences usually happen with children of racism and the one or the other concept?
Yeah, that's what I was actually going to ask you guys, was when you think about the concept of the othering and racism, can you guys think of any examples from anything we've done in class this past, throughout the semester?
Yeah, and I've got one here that I remember when we were reading Recitataff by Toni Morrison, and it's a perfect example for how does this happen. And, you know, back when Twyla and Roberta were there, and there's a quote there, it goes, "My mother wouldn't like you putting me in here." And it's because the fact that, you know, they were different races, and I believe it was Twyla's mother is racist, you know, and that went into what these children experienced, even though they later became friends. You know, there was that, you know, at the beginning, it was impacted by parents
Yeah. I think I see exactly what you're saying. It's more so when it relates to racism, it's definitely something that kind of comes from your family and parents in a way, and the people that you're around, as far as how it develops and how it is kind of how a child might possibly come to understand it a little bit more. Um, so yeah, it's definitely, I think with racism, I don't think personally, I don't think anybody is really born racist. I think
Sure.
it's more so that those people that are around you, whether it be friends or maybe even your family, sadly, are the people that influence some people to be somewhat racist. So can you can you pinpoint a channel for where racism starts with children?
So I actually, I did a little bit of research on this, discussing where does the form or development of racism start with children. I guess what I've learned so far is early as 6 months, even a baby's brain can notice race-bias differences. And by ages 2 to 4, children can internalize racial biases, which is crazy to think even as young as 2 to 4, that you can start creating these certain thoughts and ideas. And by age 12, many children become set in their beliefs, giving parents a decade to mold the learning processes so that it decreases racial biases and improves cultural understanding. And that kind of goes hand in hand what you were saying earlier. It's all about the environmental factors, whether that's the grandparents, the parents, just the general community. Those are kind of the exact channels where racism exactly starts with certain ages within children.
Yeah. And before we go on, even just to think about those statistics that you mentioned, um, at what age would you guys say that you started to notice a difference in any type of race or color from maybe a class, like your peers or classmates or people that were around you? When did you start to notice that maybe
Well,
this person over here is not is different from me, or we're very
yeah.
similar in a way?
So I remember, I don't know if I can pinpoint an exact age, but I remember it was very, very young, just because, like I said, my parents are both immigrants from Argentina, and the vast majority of people where I grew up weren't. So with, like, for example, speaking Spanish with them and stuff, it was very much a very part of an out-group thing. That very few other people who went to my school, spoke Spanish or anything. So I definitely noticed those differences. Really early on, probably before kindergarten even.
Yeah, I would say.
No, go on.
No, go ahead, Jake.
No, I was just going to mention, so like in my introduction, I mentioned I lived and still are friends with a very diverse group of community. It wasn't until later on in life, I guess throughout ages, that I would hang out with them, like everyday life and so forth, that it wasn't until those same friends of a diverse community, minority community, started facing discrimination that I actually started noticing race. Because, I essentially grew with them since childbirth. They were still brothers till this day is what I would call them. But it wasn't until later on that I noticed, on whether it was a soccer field, the classroom, you name it, and we're, them having stuff spoken to them, which was a form of discrimination or racism. That I really happened to notice, like, listen, like, I guess there are differences in us, but never really noticed it until then, which I guess wasn't until later, maybe 8, 9, 10 years old. But even before that, like 8, 7, 6, 5, there was no difference between us except we were brothers.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, like how I've been to many different schools. I think I started to notice like the difference in races and racism probably around when I was in kindergarten, just from like other classmates and things that we were starting to be shown like and educated on. I remember there was an occurrence, I think it was like in kindergarten, where a teacher had showed us like a video about Martin Luther King as a child and how he was hanging out with like one other white child. And then in the video, his mom, the white child's mom, is yelling at her son, like, "Hey, you need to get back over here. You're not allowed to hang out with him." And I remember watching that video and the kids around me. I remember seeing that there were like many different students around, and I just remember watching it like, wow, that is,
Yeah.
I've never seen anything like that. And then it's kind of when it started to happen where they were like
Yeah.
educating on it almost too.
Yeah.
Um, So how can how do you guys think that parents can educate their children to
Yeah.
halt these situations from happening, from racism to othering?
Mhm. Well, I think it's important for parents to start early because, like we talked about earlier, by ages 2 to 4, children can already internalize racial. But according to the American Psychological Association, most American adults think that children should be almost 5 years old before talking about them with race. Even though, like we said, even infants can notice, race-based differences and are aware of race. And preschoolers can already have, racial biases.
Yeah, I guess to piggyback off of what Enzo was saying, like, let's say, for instance, it was one of our children. We happen to see an occurrence of racism. It may not have been intentional, but it did happen. Instead of treating that action with scolding the child and reprimanding them in an anger way, let's instead correct and redirect through love. So instead of them thinking, oh, it's entirely bad, like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Like, my parents are mad at me and I did something wrong. Instead of going, they'll be thinking, oh, listen, understand something happened wrong. This is how I'm going to go about it next. And my parents aren't mad at me, but they're understanding there is a problem and we can reach it in the right way.
Yeah.
So what do you guys think that schools and other social institutions can do to help prevent these situations?
Well, I personally think that classes like this one that we're in, they're very effective because through addressing these kind of situations and allowing people to learn more about what's going on around them, it allows us to keep an open mind and understand different backgrounds
Yeah.
and experiences that people have been through and faced.
Yeah. And also on top of that, I think it's important. We're going to get into some examples and a little bit of racism that we've personally experienced, but it's important for school administration and principals and whatnot to take it seriously and not just be kind of flippant with it and be like, oh, they got to take it seriously and address it, which I've seen personally not happen before.
Yeah, I think it really just ties back to just really addressing the situation and trying to really call it out as like, hey, pay attention to this. Like I said, I really do think just classes like this, by having something like this that actually informs students on these bigger issues, it kind of lets us learn more about other people's, just different backgrounds with people too. So have any of you guys ever experienced any racism as a child, or did you see any of your friends experience racism?
I guess I'll go first with this question. So given I have a few Asian friends, ethnicities of Cambodian, Chinese, Vietnamese, so forth, a few of the occasions that I witnessed happened in 2 occasions. One was in the classroom, the other one was in the soccer field. For instance, on the soccer field, my one Asian friend was playing and made a bad pass to one of our teammates. And one of the other fellow Caucasian teammates happened to mention, like, you should go back to your country because you have no way of being on the field, just given the notion of him making a bad pass, which is simply xenophobic at the end of the day. And moreover, that same friend from childhood being in the classroom and simply getting a bad grade on a geometry exam. And again, the stereotype of Asians being good at math was played into the scene. And the comments were made in jokingly saying, well, you're not really Asian because if you were so good, then you would have gotten a good grade. So not myself, I had personal experiences as Jacob Gearman, but instead, other friends who have faced discrimination from such an early age, which is irreconcilable.
Yeah. And I remember personally when I was in 4th grade, this kid told me for almost no reason, essentially he told me to go back to Mexico just because my parents were, from a Southern American country. And it's not even, not even the same.
It's ridiculous. Yeah.
It's just,
well, at the same time, it's a kid too. You have to understand it's like at that
Yeah.
age, some
Yeah.
people will say
And that's
things
the
that's
thing, it's
ridiculous.
fourth grade, you know, like it's
Don't understand the
obviously
consequences.
that's obviously coming from
But around that
parents, you
time, I
know?
do think people are starting to understand
Yeah.
race and
Yeah.
racism and really how it does affect people. For me personally, like I said, my dad is American and my mom is Filipino. So I'm mixed. I have like a very, maybe a little bit darker of a complexion. And throughout school, really, I've experienced plenty of racism. Like I said, I grew up in many different communities. Even when I was in like the inner city schools, I've been in like a school where there were more black students than white students. And when I was in that school, it was kind of like I was viewed more as like a white person. So even like the other students would say things to me, but at the same time, it was like it didn't really. I never had this sense of I have an Asian background when I was at that school because of how they viewed me. But when I moved down to southeastern Ohio, down in Logan, Ohio, um, it's a very small community. It's kind of out in the middle. It's in Hocking Hills, and I would say I started experiencing this. Like I started experiencing it when people would ask me like where I'm from, as in like, oh, you're probably not from the U.S. You must be from like another country. And I was like, are you? No, I'm from Columbus. I'm from here. But they were really what they were trying to figure out is like, what are you? Are you Asian or white? Like they were just trying to figure out, but they didn't understand. Like when you're asking a question like that, it's kind of weird. Like
Yeah, and that's the
it makes
thing.
you
And
feel
I think
unwelcome.
I think for a lot of people, it's not, you know, who are doing that, it's not totally intentional. I don't think they're trying to be, you know, racist. It's not like something like go back to your country or, you know, something like that, but it still has the same effect of making people feel unwelcome. And at the end of the day, it is still, you know, racism.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that wasn't really just the first occasion, but what I started noticing was the school that I was at down in Logan, it was really predominantly more it was more like there were just more white kids down in this community. And I would have very like derogative slurs said to me. Like I said, I'm half American, half Filipino. I would have kids call me a Mexican, a taco, burrito, all these stupid things. And I would just think like, dude, I'm not even Mexican.
Yeah, exactly.
Just like, so now I'm trying to think, how did like the way I had to deal with it, it was just kind of like I got in a lot of trouble because of it.
Mhm.
But at the same time, even the teachers in that community, like
Mhm.
they knew it was going to happen and they kind of would let it roll. And you kind of had to just deal with it as a student out there. And
Sad.
I mean, I
Yeah.
And
definitely
that's
got in trouble because there were kids that would say things to me where it was like, I ended up getting in a fight with them. We
Mhm.
would we would actually physically go
Yeah.
at it. But by the end of those like situations, what I did kind of find was there's like a built respect that comes from it where these
Mhm.
kids after they realize, you know, I shouldn't really say something like that to somebody, they kind of understand like they don't do it anymore. And you
Mhm.
think like maybe these two kids are now not going to like each other at all anymore because this one got hurt or this one is very offended. But actually, what happened was a lot of these kids that would say these kind of things to me, we ended up being like really good friends by the end of it.
Yeah.
It just kind of builds, it actually built a relationship
Mhm.
from something that started as racist,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
guess.
Like
No,
you can see
yeah,
the
and
beauty in it in some capacity. It's like from solving for this issue, right? Of you guys both coming together, you and now to be your friend, you created a friendship. And that also stems from you solving the problem of racism, going, hey, this isn't right. There should be respect between us. There is no differences in, you know, whatever. And now here we are in a better place. So the
Yeah.
thing we can take that same accomplishment that you and your friend have and place that throughout communities of children, who knows, you know, where we could be in the next few decades when it comes to solving for the problems of discrimination, racial biases.
I think it's definitely gotten better too. I mean, like with schools and stuff from, you know, 15 years ago when we were kids in elementary school, I definitely think that, you know, teachers and administration stuff is more aware of these issues, but there's definitely still more to go.
Sure.
This was a really good and eye-opening conversation. I think to close this out, I think we should talk about what can we personally do to help solve these issues?
Yeah, well, to start off, honestly, I think with racism and othering, maybe like a group that is trying to look at another group as different and think that they're better than them because of that, or really with racism, you need to just stand up to it. Don't allow it. If somebody says something, maybe it's not to you or maybe it's to someone else, really call them out on it and like really point it
Yeah.
out to them like, hey, you can't say something like that.
Yeah.
Or just don't let it, like, I think
Just don't be
relating back to
bystander.
that reading, The Levers by Coe, Deming gets to a point where when he was adopted, his parents, they renamed him David, but he got to a point in the community that where he was at where he had kind of had to desensitize to what people were saying to him, like the kind of derogative terms that he was being
Mhm.
called. You really just need to stand up to that and not allow it. So really to kind of go against it, just don't allow it. Really stand up for yourself if you're experiencing it, or if you see somebody experiencing anything like that, definitely call them out on it.
Yeah.
I think you're spot on, Scott. Exactly saying like it starts with you, right? Like being the leader in the community, saying, hey, putting your foot down, drawing the line, saying this is racist, this is discrimination, racial bias, you name it. And it needs to stop here because it will spread. And, in pertaining to systemic racism in children, a lot of young people look up to us as college students saying, hey, this is where I want to be in the next few years. And how do they act differently? And that starts with us.
Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely be a role model. Yeah,
Set an example.
exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Well,
thank you, everyone. Great conversation.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
thank you guys for getting this put together. I think we've had a great conversation today, and I'm really looking forward to getting a really good grade on our podcast because I think we've done a really good job here today.
Yeah. All right. I'm gonna